Peace. Welcome to part two. It's your boy Malik 16, still here from Plates and Crates, continuing the launch off of our new venture, A RAP CRITIC, and this is video 2, breaking down the introductory understanding of the ranking and rating system that we're going to be using, titled I Used to Love Her, the I Used to Love Her scale. And before I recap what we did in video 1, just want to say shout out to my hoodie though. You know, DJ EFN, Drink Champs, much love. And then I gotta send a super big shout out to the homies of Hip Hop Trivia down in Atlanta. If you've ever had the chance to partake in that event, whether in person or virtually, then you know it's an experience. And you should also know, as you can tell, I have no problem showing love and extending that reach to anyone who's out there authentically preserving the culture, because that's what this is all about, authentically. And with that, I want to present another challenge of this channel to my old heads, and that's anyone my age or older. I challenge you to go back to some things that you've loved as long as you've known you loved them, and try to exercise approaching it with new eyes and new ears, and seeing if you can embrace a new perspective on that thing that you love. And for my young heads, anyone who stumbles across this channel and they may not be so familiar with most of the albums that we cover, I challenge you to dare yourself to see if you can listen to some of this old stuff and how much of it you can sit through, and if you get something out of it. So that's my challenge to both the young heads and the old heads. Why? Because those divisions will always exist. As long as we can learn how to meet in the middle, then that is the whole premise of us creating a global hip hop community. And on that note, please take a minute to like and subscribe to this channel, because we are still in the process of building this global hip hop community. So it's all about numbers. If you are in Finland, if you are in Cameroon, if you are in Sydney and you love hip hop, I want to hear from you. We want to hear from you, because that is how we're creating this final word on what is a classic when we review hip hop albums on this channel. So in the first category, which we covered in video 1, we went over the 10 dimensions that make up that category, and each dimension is going to be ranked on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. That's where we get the name, the I Used to Love Her scale from. Shout out to the homie Swan once again. All right, which takes us to category 2, which is what this video will be covering, and that is the rapper's performance on that album. Again, we're not here to rate the rapper in general or the span of their career, who they are, what they've done. It's about how they performed on this particular project that we're reviewing. You know, each video we're gonna go over one album at a time. And with no further ado, the dimensions under the rapper's performance are: Dimension 1, personality and charisma. How compelling was this rapper or were these rappers, if they're a group, in getting you to care about what they had to say on this album? How well of a job did they do of drawing you into their world, of gripping you into what they had to say? That's something you want to be considering on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, okay? This takes us directly into Dimension 2, which is the question of believability versus suspension of disbelief. Now, the reason this exists on both of them are on the same scale is because there are times where an album expects you to understand that they are going into a character and assuming a role for the majority or the entirety of the album. An example of that would be when Kool Keith goes into his Dr. Octagon persona, or an album like Eminem's very first major release, the Slim Shady LP, where he makes it clear, he tells you that he is in the Slim Shady character throughout that album, and he expects you to understand that because the next album was the Marshall Mathers LP, right? So those are those rare cases, and I say rare because the default assumption in rap music and hip hop in general is that you are about what you say you're about. You know, if you don't tell us otherwise, we are going to assume that you're about that life and you live what you say you do, and that's good or bad. If you're righteous, we're going to be looking at you if you do something ratchet. If you purport a gangster lifestyle, then we're definitely looking at you if you do something decidedly non-gangster. So, you know, the only deviation from that I see is when rappers are taken to task by a court of law or some kind of like news show, and they're like, oh, we're just actors playing a role. But on their albums, what they're really doing is talking on the skits, talking at the end of the song, telling you, hey, F rap, this is me in real life, this is what I do. So it's always hilarious to me. But yeah, because believability is such a big factor in hip hop, you want to be looking at that as you look at Dimension 2, how much you believe what this artist is saying. Regardless of Dimension 1, how much personality and charisma they showed, do you believe them? And if it's a suspension of disbelief kind of situation, how good of a job did they do going into that character and getting you to abandon the disbelief factors? Like, man, that was impossible. That's unrealistic. Oh, it was a character though. So you want to be ranking that on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. All right, that's Dimension 2, which takes us to Dimension 3, which is delivery. And I want to be clear about what delivery is. It's delivery and use of voice. And delivery has everything to do with cadence and intonation, which is basically the understanding that a rapper is the final instrument. A dope beat is a dope beat all day, but once a rapper puts their voice to this beat, they are now the final ingredient. They're making a choice in how they use their voice. When you hear Nelly approach songs, that was a choice to go in that sing-song tone that he uses. Anyone who's ever heard Nelly rap outside of that tone knows that he's got some versatility. He's just chosen to use his voice that way for the majority of his career. DMX choosing to sing in that gravelly tone that he uses and grunt in between. Those are all choices. That's use of voice. That's delivery. That is how they chose to approach the song making. All right. So you want to think about how creative and how masterful these rappers were with their use of their voice and delivery throughout the whole album tracks. And rank that on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Getting a little tongue-tied here, right? Takes us to Dimension 4. Very distinct difference. Flow. I want to be clear. That's why these are two different dimensions. Flow and delivery are not the same. For years, they have been used interchangeably. And I want to be clear. Flow and delivery are not the same. Okay? Flow has everything to do with the structure, the rhyme pattern, okay, and the melody that the rappers choose to use. Right? So you want to be thinking about, man, did they use a general poetic iambic pentameter? Were they doing an ABB rhyme scheme? Were they doing an AB rhyme scheme? Or did they go all the way freeway with it and have the words and sounds line up in places you didn't even expect, but it still works? Were they offbeat? Some rappers have made a whole entire career out of being offbeat, and that's debatable within the culture, but it has happened, right? How many flows were used throughout this album? Did the flow switch up, or was it a constant kind of steady flow, and that's why you loved it? That's what made it work. How many flows within a song? Did the flow switch up within a verse? Was the hook the same flow pattern as the verses? Was there just general laziness when it came to that? So you want to think about flow. Who is masterful with their flow? How was it used? And rank that on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, which takes us to Dimension 5, wordplay and bar intent. This is where all those tools and devices that your high school English teacher tried to impart to you come into play. This is where we get allegory, imagery, personification, alliteration, onomatopoeia, double entendre, all of those things, conceit, and how well they're employed. How clever is this rapper? Was there intent behind the bar? This is where you kind of have to get into the mind of a rapper, and partially why I am the person guiding this show. Again, it's not my show, it's our show for the global hip hop community, but because you got a rap pro who thinks like a rapper, I can put it in the words that need to be put, right? Okay, the intention behind the bar, if you were a seasoned listener, you'll be able to pick up on, wow, this rapper was really trying to go somewhere with the wordplay. They really did some nuanced things. And there's some things that are very specific to hip hop, where you get sometimes rappers who do these backwards statements. I call them like anagram sentences, word jumbles, where like a great example of that is when Lil Wayne said,
I think you stand under me if you don't understand me.
Or Drake 3000 says,
I've noticed that you're one of a kind. That makes you kind of the one.
real simple but cute, clever kind of wordplay, right? Common has made a whole career off of that. And so those things are really specific to hip hop, but you really want to be considering how often the rapper use these tools and how much effort they put into the words. How often this is happening? Are the verses just packed with these literary devices and wordplay, okay? And you want to rank that on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, which takes us into a category that exists all its own, and that is dimension 6. That is the punchline and quotability factor. All right, so I put both of these on the same level just because not every rapper is a punchline rapper, but those rappers are still able to hit you with these lines that are just so memorable because of their conventional wisdom. So a great example of a rapper who may not hit you with the slickest lines, but has left you with a career worth of just verses and lines that you could just live by, Scarface. You can literally translate some of his verses and lines onto a poster, make it into a meme, and these could be quotes for the day, same way that Shakespeare and Mark Twain are quoted. Tupac, Nipsey Hussle, these are also great examples of people who really have poetic sensibility in what they're saying. They're not wasting words. They are making these thought-provoking, food for thought kind of lines that last the test of time. Then you have punchlines on the same level, because where they're rappers who may not be as deep, they're able to still give you something to remember. And punchlines are usually relegated to comedy. We think of comedy when we think of punchlines, but punchlines are really where, as we talked about with wordplay, all those literary devices, this is where the literary devices of simile and metaphor shine the most. I separated these because in the punchline world, like is your best friend. And metaphors, if you're able to use a metaphor in a clever way, then you are the one. Not to be confused with a conceit. A conceit is a long metaphor where you just like assume the properties of something else. You're gonna see that more in the wordplay dimension. But in dimension 6 here, punchlines is being used to say something to get a reaction. And punchlines have become very well respected. It was a slow burn in hip hop. It's more of a gem and a prize tool in the battle world. Ever since back in the day, Grandmaster Caz, Kumo D versus Busy B, Big Daddy Kane, these rappers were doing it and people didn't even realize how much they liked it until we got into the mixtape era of the 90s, where it was like the Fiend kind of phase for who's got the illest punchline. So punchlines still hold a lot of weight in hip hop. And I know a lot of people feel like, I don't care about all those fancy words, I just care about how real my favorite rapper is. But punchlines matter, and that's why they're on the same level here with quotability, and I want you to be ranking that on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. All right, dimension 7, we start to get into the 3 C's, but they each have their own dimension. So the first dimension that we're going to be talking about in these C's is dimension 7, and that is concepts. How conceptual was this artist? Did this artist give you any concept songs? A concept song is where an artist takes you into the mind of someone else. They go into an empathetic role where they tell you a story from someone else's perspective, or they talk from someone else's perspective, or they talk to an inanimate object. They take on another persona. They tell a story backwards. All these things took a certain level of abstract reasoning where it's not too abstract, but it's like, oh, they went beyond here. This is not just linear. This is not just straightforward. They're asking you to go on this ride with them and understand that there's like 3 dimensions to what's being done. Not everybody does that. This is what separates the artists from the rappers. And this is something you should be considering on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats if there's a concept on this album. And it doesn't even have to be a whole concept song. It could be one verse that's conceptual, or maybe the whole album sometimes fits as a concept, like To Pimp a Butterfly, big conceptual album. American Gangster, conceptual, right? So something you want to consider on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats, because that is a true sign of effort and artistry. Takes us to the second C, which is dimension 8, content. There are 2 dimensions of content. This first dimension, dimension 8, content is going to be the externalized content, the social consciousness. How much does this rapper talk about stuff outside of themselves, things that they're surrounded by, their environment, social ills, politics, world issues? How much are they talking about that? Do they even talk about it? Do they touch on it, or do they stay away from it? Which takes us directly to dimension 9, content, introspection. This is about how deep internally and how deep inward that rapper goes to tell you a little bit more about their life, their selves, their view, and their perspective on things from their own experiences. So when we talk about these 2 content dimensions, the external and the internal, 2 great examples of this are Jadakiss and Drake. So you have Jadakiss, who's famous for kind of not giving you a lot of himself. He's actually been in interviews where he said he felt that maybe that's what held him from being a bigger artist than he is, and he felt like he didn't let people get to know him. And then you have Drake, who you almost never hear talk about social issues or anything outside of his little bubble that he lives in. Drake is very famous for, a lot of his songs dealing with who do I trust? I don't know who to trust. I got all this money. I'm so sad and lonely. How do I spend this money? Nice problems to have. And telling your favorite girl's business. But rarely. I think I've only heard Drake talk about things outside of himself on like a rare occasion. He did a song with like Snoop Dogg's daughter about gun violence. It's very rare. Same with Jada. Jada is the guru of telling you all the things to watch out for on the street, all his street observations, but very seldom do you get, hey, here's how I grew up, here's how I feel, this is what makes me cry. You're not gonna get that. So you want to consider that when you're looking at dimension 8 and 9, content external, content internal. How much of that did the rapper do on this album? And rank both of those on a scale from 1 to 5 heartbeats. Now, that takes us to dimension 10, the final dimension, storytelling. Does this rapper tell a story on this album? The old standard used to be you can always tell who's a great rapper by their ability to tell a story. I don't know if that standard still exists, but you want to think about, was there any storytelling element? And it doesn't even have to be a whole storytelling song. Not expecting every rapper to be Slick Rick, but maybe within a verse. Was one of the verses told in a story format? That ability is still an art to be able to take someone, a listener, on a ride somewhere. All right, so those are your 10 dimensions. Just a quick recap. Category 2, the rapper's performance on the album. Dimension 1 is personality. Dimension 2 is the believability versus suspension of disbelief. Dimension 3 is the delivery and use of the voice. Dimension 4 is the flow. Dimension 5 is the wordplay and bar intention. Just so you know, a bar is just 4 measures of music. Anybody who's ever studied music theory knows that. It's not the lines. The lines exist within the bars, right? Okay, and then dimension 6 are your punchlines and quotability. Dimension 7 are the concepts, how conceptual are the artist. Dimension 8 is the content on the external social conscious level. Dimension 9 is the content on the internal introspective level, and dimension 10 is storytelling. That is your I Used to Love Her scale in a nutshell from video 1 to video 2. Stick around and we'll do one more video where I show you how we are going to add it all together and compile and score the scale and what you get from that. All right, so once again, it's been your boy Malik 16. Please like and subscribe. We are building this global hip-hop community. Like and subscribe to the channel. I will see you on the flip side. Until then, F a rap critic. Talk about it while I live it.